Welcome to another episode of the Discover Bittensor podcast. My name is Nick, and today I want to talk about something pretty important that's happening inside Bittensor. Because over the last period, many subnet tokens have gone down significantly, especially over the last month. And this hasn't only affected weak or speculative subnets, but especially the top 10 subnets. And it's also affected serious subnets with real teams, real products, and credible long term potential. So it creates an important question. What does a subnet token actually represent? And more directly, why the hell would I buy one if I could just hold tau and earn tau rewards thanks to root staking? This question matters because subnet tokens aren't simple. They are not equity, they are not traditional revenue claims, and in most cases, they don't give the whole direct ownership of the company or team building the subnet. So, if subnet tokens aren't shares, what are they? And my answer is this. A subnet token is a market-based exposure token connected to a specific machine intelligence economy inside Bittensor, which sounds pretty abstract, so let's unpack it. A subnet is basically an incentive system. It has miners, validators, emissions, a task or incentive, a market, and in some cases it also has real external demand. And the subnet token is the asset through which the market prices that specific subnet economy. So if the subnet becomes important, attracts usage, generates revenue, and creates a durable connection between that revenue and token demand, the token may become valuable. If the subnet does not create real demand, the token may mostly reflect expectation, and it actually might even go down significantly in price. Right now, in my opinion, the market is still learning how to value these assets, and most valuations of these tokens are basically pretty random, in my opinion. um, so let's start with this subnet dip. So it started basically, I think, around the Templar exit situation or a few weeks later. And well, some people dismiss it as a simple market noise, but it might reveal a deeper issue, namely that the subnet market doesn't yet have a mature valuation framework. Because in traditional equities, investors can look at revenue, profit, margins, growth, balance sheet, etc. And in Bittensor, valuation is much, much harder because the token is not legal ownership of the company running the subnet, and the subnets, or most subnets, don't even have any revenue at all. So it's very speculative. And this means that investors need to ask a different set of questions. Does the subnet produce something useful? Is there external demand? Does the subnet generate revenue? Is there a credible mechanism that connects revenue back to the token? Are emissions sustainable? Is the owner aligned for the long term? Think about Sam, the owner of Templar, which apparently wasn't aligned with with Bittensor, at least for the long term. Um, is the team building something that could matter in 3 to 5 years? And those are the kind of questions that matter. And the problem is that the market is not yet consistently pricing these things. Some subnets with very little or no revenue can trade at high valuations. I mean, more than 0.01 tau. There are many examples. Some subnets with actual usage and serious teams can trade much lower. I'm thinking about Red Team or ENS at this moment as we speak. Just to give you an idea, Red Team is a subnet that's focusing on cybersecurity, and there's a company called InnerWorks behind it, which generate real revenue, and they also buy back their token, not insane amounts, but a little bit. And it's been, and the Red Team subnet token has a price of around 0.004 tau, so it's like one of the lower 20 subnets on Bittensor. Meanwhile, there are many subnets which don't do anything, which are just extractive, with higher valuations and sometimes even much higher valuations, which feels incorrect, to say the least. But I think we just have to accept that early markets are often irrational before they become selective. And I do think this is where we are in Bittensor today. The subnet market is still in the very early phase of price discovery. It's not yet a clean valuation machine. It's still a discovery mechanism. Now let's focus on what a subnet token represents. Because to understand subnet tokens, we need to separate three things. First, the subnet itself. Second, the team or company behind the subnet. Third, the subnet token. And these are connected, but they are not the same. A team may build a successful business around a subnet, but the subnet token does not automatically give holders ownership of the business. And that's the key difficulty. For a subnet token to have long-term value, there needs to be a credible bridge between subnet success and token demand. And that bridge can take different forms. It can come from staking demand, it can come from validator participation, it can come from emissions, it can come from buybacks. There must at least be some mechanism, some connection, because without such a mechanism, the token risks becoming mostly a speculative representation of belief in the subnet, which doesn't mean the subnet token can't go up, but it means the investment case is weaker and more dependent on market psychology. And this is why alphanomics matters. Alphanomics is the attempt to explain how value flows through a subnet token. It asks, where does demand for alpha come from? What creates buy pressure? What creates sell pressure? How much alpha is emitted? How much is burned? How much is locked? How much is sold by miners, validators, or owners? And how does real-world usage affect the token? And this is the discipline that Bittensor investors will need to develop, because without it, subnet investing becomes guesswork. And let's have a look at Chutes, the biggest subnet of Bittensor, as an example. Chutes is one of the most important, or maybe the most important subnets, because it gives us one of the clearest examples of how subnet token value might connect to real usage. Chutes is a decentralized serverless AI compute platform. It allows users to run and access open source AI models through an API without managing the infrastructure themselves. In simple terms, Chutes is trying to provide useful AI infrastructure. That makes it different from a subnet that only has a roadmap or narrative. Chutes has usage, it has a product, it has external demand, and it has discussed, and it's already doing buybacks. Like over the last couple of months, I believe its daily revenue has been about $15,000, and I do believe that they use all or most of it to buy back and burn, I think, at least to buy back their own token. No, I don't think they burn. I think they stake it. They put it in some kind of treasury. But so it means every day there's basically $15,000 buy pressure of the Chutes alpha token. And just a small reminder, all these subnet tokens have the same tokenomics as Bitcoin or Tau itself. So 21 million will ever exist. And Chutes, for example, already has emitted, I believe, a little bit more than 5 million of its subnet token. Just a very simple example. Imagine you have this pool. Imagine you have 21 million tokens that will ever exist. And you know that Chutes is basically buying back many of them because they have real revenue. The revenue is probably going to grow, and they use all or most of it to buy back their own token. Meaning that the token inflation will be much lower because of this process. Because of this continuous buy pressure, the token becomes more scarce. And because it's more scarce, the value in theory should get higher. And so if you own, I don't know, 0.1% of all the Chutes subnet tokens that will ever exist, you should expect that the value should raise. Of course, it's not this easy because there must be real demand, and the first years there's a lot of inflation. But in theory, it works like this. Okay. So yeah, a subnet token becomes more investable when there's a clear answer to the question, why should demand for this token increase if the subnet succeeds? And Chutes provides one possible answer. If usage grows, revenue can grow. If revenue grows, buybacks can grow. If buybacks grow, token demand can become more structurally connected to the success of the subnet. That's the optimistic model. But there's an important complication. Even Chutes has experienced significant price weakness. I believe end of February 2026, its price went up to 0.11, something like that. And at the moment of recording, its price is around 0.07. So what is it? I think 30-40% lower, something like that. And this might be strange for people to understand, because you might ask, but how is this possible if they use $15,000 every single day, whilst all the other subnets don't do that? How is it possible that its price goes down? Well, because I think many people were so eager to buy the Chutes token when DTAO launched that its price spiked to, I think, 0.4 or so, which is huge. And we are still looking for a bottom, like a price where the market thinks that Chutes' real value at this moment lies. And I think we might be close, actually. And also, this significant price weakness doesn't mean that the thesis is broken. It means that early subnet prices are influenced by many forces at once: emissions, liquidity, profit taking, TAO flows, investor rotation, and uncertainty about how to value subnet tokens. Because some people they think like this: they say the Chutes token is 0.1, and there are many tokens which are 0.005. So the upside in theory is much higher, or it goes up much faster because liquidity is lower, which is true in a certain way, but it can also go down way faster, of course, because it's much more volatile. And I think this is something we might have seen over the last couple of months, that people thought a lot like this. Like, why the hell would I buy the biggest subnet if I could buy other subnets that are also cool, also promising, but have a 10 times or even more lower price than Chutes? So yeah, in an immature market, price doesn't always reflect quality, and over time that may change, but we ain't there yet. So then let's have a look at Bittensor's revenue compared to other blockchains. Because the next question is whether Bittensor as a whole is undervalued compared to other major blockchains. I believe that Bittensor in the first quarter of 2026 has generated around $43 million of revenue. And this is mostly due to Chutes and Targon and Liam, the biggest subnets. And this is actually quite a lot. I'm not going to compare it with other blockchains, but have a look at this, because I know that many blockchains, like, not to blame them, but many blockchains, even like Avalanche, Sui, they haven't had that much revenue at all. And like, to me, Bittensor is just completely undervalued. When you realize that Bittensor, as we speak, has a market cap of around 3 billion, and there are coins like Dogecoin, which has a much higher market cap, that's already telling you something, right? And I think the repricing will come. I don't know if it comes next month or this year, I don't know, but I do believe it will come somewhere in the future, and I do think it might be pretty violent, especially when you realize that we've had the halving December 2025, and what we know from Bitcoin's halvings is that it's often in the year after the halving that there's a significant upside in price. So I think we might be pretty close, actually, to this point where the halving is gonna have its effect, in combination with the success and the continuous success of many different subnets in Bittensor. So, well, let's see. Now, I also wanted to talk about the conviction proposal that's gone live, I believe, a few days ago. Because one of the biggest problems in subnet investing is trust. If a subnet owner receives alpha emissions, investors want to know whether the owner is aligned for the long term. Will the owner continue building? Will they support the subnet? Will they dump tokens? Will they leave when the market becomes difficult? And these questions matter because subnet tokens depend heavily on trust in the team and the incentive design. And I actually read an article about this in, I think, January or February of this year, because you have to know the owner gets 18% of the emissions. So at this moment, every subnet gets 3,600 subnet tokens per day, and 18% of those goes to the subnet owner. And what we've seen with Templar, with this situation that happened 2 months ago, 1.5 months ago, is that the owner can just literally sell millions worth of alpha tokens with a few clicks and completely rug investors like you and me who have invested in the subnet. And unfortunately, this is what happened with Templar. As a countermeasure, the Open Tensor Foundation has come with the conviction lock. It's very important because it introduces a visible commitment mechanism on chain. The basic idea is that subnet owner emissions are locked and can't be immediately unstaked and sold. Unlocking requires time, and when a subnet owner wants to do this, everyone in the whole world can see this because it's on chain, basically. The signal is on chain. So instead of relying only on public statements, investors can look at whether the owner has meaningful locked exposure to the subnet. So imagine we have 30 or 50 subnets which basically lock up their alpha tokens, and I don't know, 80 or so that don't. Would you rather invest in the ones that don't or that do? So I think this is gonna really help investors navigate through the different subnets and make smarter choices. However, on the other hand, conviction lock doesn't make a bad subnet good. It doesn't create revenue or it doesn't prevent deregistration, but it helps answer one important question. Is the subnet owner economically committed for the long term? And that's valuable. And in a young market, investors need better filters. Conviction lock can become one of those filters. A subnet with real revenue, serious execution, and visible owner conviction is very different from a subnet with only marketing and liquid owner tokens. And this is part of Bittensor's maturation. We're still very early, but the market is slowly moving from narrative-based trust towards evidence-based trust. And you have to understand, this is unique. This is unique in crypto. I don't think there's any other crypto project where the owner can choose to basically be extremely transparent about its own holdings. So now let's come back to what it means to hold subnet tokens. Holding subnet tokens isn't the same as holding Tau. Tau is the base asset of the Bittensor network, and subnet tokens are more concentrated. They represent exposure to specific subnet economies, and it makes them potentially more upside sensitive, but also more fragile. And what's very important is that those subnet tokens, they provide very high or relatively high APYs, often in the range of 30 to 60% or something like this, depending on the subnet and the validator. And root, so subnet 0, root means that you stake your Tau and you basically get Tau as a reward, and you don't risk anything because it's Tau, it's not a subnet token. At this moment, it's about 7% yield, but I heard Cons recently mentioned that he is thinking about reducing or maybe even eliminating the traditional root yield or changing it. So meaning maybe you can still choose to stake to root, but instead of just getting Tau, you get subnet tokens from, I don't know, maybe the top 10, top 15, something like this. So they basically want to push people out of the comfortable root staking, because of course it feels very safe, and it is very safe. And subnet tokens are very dangerous as an investment because it's so early. But the ecosystem needs more subnet investors, in his opinion, I think, and I think I share this with him. So it's not certain at all what's gonna be decided, but he's thinking about this. The Open Tensor Foundation is working on it. So this is very interesting. So, for example, at this moment, root yield is 7%. Maybe at the end of this year or something like that, you can still stake to root, and maybe you only get 1% or 2%, or maybe you can only receive subnet, let's say the top 10, top 15 subnets tokens, which would be pretty interesting because this means there's suddenly a very big buy pressure on the top 10, top 15. So let's keep an eye on that. And so yeah, but coming back to today's setting, at this moment there's a lot of uncertainty in the DTAU market. Many people have lost a significant amount of tau over the recent month, I would say. And I think many people ask themselves, why the hell is this subnet without any revenue valued at, I don't know, 0.005, and the other one, well, again, without revenue at 0.015. This is what we've seen with some subnets that have been, for example, ranging around 0.01 tau for a couple of months. Suddenly, they fell pretty hard, like they crashed 50%, something like that. And the question that I ask myself, does this change anything for the subnet to have its price halved? And I actually think no, not that much, because as long as they don't get deregistered and they don't generate the revenue, it doesn't really matter if they have a price of 0.005, 0.008, 0.01, 0.01, 0.015. It doesn't really matter. What matters is if there's net inflow, so the price goes up and they receive tau from the network, they get emissions. That's something that's of course interesting, but many subnets, also many quality subnets, actually many high ranking subnets, they don't get emissions anymore, or very few emissions. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think many people are waking up to this question that I just asked, like, why would my subnet, or why would the subnet that I like not be priced 50% lower, for example? Would it change anything if it were to be the case? And I think often the answer is no. So that's why it's still a very confusing time. Maybe some people don't agree with this analysis, but this is how I look at it at this moment in time. Maybe it'll change, but at this moment, I personally would be pretty careful to buy anything that has shown quite some volatility and that's higher than, let's say, 0.01 tau, something like that. Of course, the top 10, they are better and more secure because it's pretty likely that those will be around for the long term. Not necessarily, though. But yeah, I think this is something that I think many people are struggling with all these questions. And I think this is just part of how an emerging market works. So I'm really stoked to see how this develops over time, actually. And I would only encourage people to be careful when buying subnets. The best thing I can recommend, not financial advice, is to don't put all your eggs in one basket. So don't put all your tau in your favorite subnet because it still might crash, it might get deregistered, etc., etc. Divide it over a number of subnets, and don't invest too much of your tau if you don't like taking risks. Just keep it in root for this moment. That's what I would say is the safest way at this moment. But as I mentioned, it might change over time with this reduced root yield. It might force people to get more into subnets. And with this in mind, it actually might be a very interesting time right now to get into subnets because many, as I said, have crashed significantly. So, well, they can crash way more, but then it's basically over for subnets, for many subnets that have already reach very low prices. So from that point of view, there might be a fair chance that many subnets have bottomed or are bottoming right now and might go up again in the coming weeks and months. So let's see what happens there. And what I expect over the coming years is the following. I expect the subnet market to become more selective. Today, many valuations don't make much sense, and over time, I expect a clearer separation between subnets. A small number may become pretty important, and some may survive as useful niche markets, but many will lose relevance and might actually get deregistered. And this is the Pareto logic. In most competitive systems, value is not distributed evenly. A small number of winners capture a large share of attention, liquidity, and economic value. And I expect something similar in Bittensor. Not every subnet will become valuable, not every alpha token deserves a high valuation, and not every team will keep building. The important question is not whether the subnet market as a whole becomes more valuable. The important question is which subnets become durable economic engines, and that will likely depend on a few factors, such as real usage, recurring revenue, clear alphanomics, strong owner conviction, etc. And a product that matters outside the Bittensor ecosystem. And this last point is especially important. The strongest subnets will not only serve Bittensor insiders, they will produce something useful for the outside world. And so this is where long-term value can emerge. So, pretty exciting times in Bittensor. I think it's perfectly normal and natural to go through a period of pretty steep declines in subnet prices because, to be honest, many things have gone up a lot. Many subnets have gone up a lot since the beginning of this year, end of last year. So this is part, of course, of markets. Things go up, things go down. And I think Bittensor is really getting much more mature as we speak, as I said, thanks to this conviction mechanism, which is very, very cool, in my opinion. And I think that Bittensor is currently flying under the radar of many, many different investors. And I also think that what's very interesting is the following: we are kind of in a bear market with most of crypto is completely dead, and yet we still have so much activity within Bittensor. Many different teams, many different products, earning revenue, developing their subnet, and this is something we might see also in like 3, 5, 10 years. So even if crypto is entering a new bear market, subnets don't at the same time. Meaning, even if there's a bear market that lasts 6 months or 1 year, many of these subnets will just have continuous growth and revenue. And if everything goes as planned, they should use this to basically buy back their token. And to do so, they first have to buy tau. So it means even in periods of crypto bear market, there will still be a lot of buy pressure for the tau token if these subnets succeed in producing real value. And this is the most important question, of course. However, this is something I was thinking about as well. Why would a subnet, let's say a top 10 subnet, which already has a high price, why would it need to use their revenue to buy back their token? Because let's talk Chutes. Chutes could use this $15,000 or so per day to develop their team, their products, etc. And now they basically, well, in the view of certain people, waste it to basically reduce the supply of their token. And like, would it be a problem for Chutes? That's my point, to not have done any buybacks at all over the last couple of months. And why? Let's say the Chutes price would have fallen to 0.05 or 0.04. Would this have made any difference for Chutes compared to the current situation with, let's say, 0.07? I think there is a direct problem, actually, because their miners are paid in the subnet token, and they have costs for all the GPUs, for everything. So when the tau price is $200 instead of 1,000, this already reduces the value of the Chutes token. Okay, so imagine the miners get, I don't know, 2,000 Chutes tokens per day. And if tau has a price of 200 versus 1,000, this is a big difference already. And then if you compare a price of Chutes of 0.05 to 0.07, or even a bigger difference, then of course this also changes the value that minus earn minus get. So yes, I do think it has an effect. I do not really think if at this moment in time it is that important, because there are many subnets actually where the revenue is very, very small and where the miners don't have that many costs. So the difference between a price of 0.01 or 0.02, let's say Bitcast, is not that important. It is not insignificant, but it's not crucial, if you get my point. Like the miners, the content creators on Bitcast, they of course are happier if the subnet token of Bitcast is 0.03 instead of 0.01, for example. They get paid more. But with a price of 0.01, they are still happy to work with Bitcast. And that's my point. We are still in this very early phase, and I do think that the increase in Tau price alone, which in my opinion is going to happen in the coming year, would be enough already to significantly please many different miners working on many different subnets. And this is, in my opinion, is more significant than a 50% up or down movement for a subnet. But think about this yourself. I might have underestimated some aspects here, but well, it goes to show that is a very intriguing topic to think about, and only time will tell actually. And oh yeah, last thing, why this is important to mention. Of course, the big argument for buybacks is that there's always a competitor. So imagine you have Liam and Targan, two subnets that provide GPUs. If one does use its revenue to buy back the token and the other doesn't, then why the hell would people like me or you stakers buy the subnet token which doesn't get bought back? In that case, it makes no sense, and it's very likely that this subnet will see its price sink, whilst the other subnet will see its price go up. So it's this Bittensor is basically this competition, this continuous competition. And so if one of your competitors is doing buybacks and you're not, then I wish you all the best to convince people to stake into your subnet. So that's, I think, one of the strongest arguments why it does make sense to do buybacks. But again, it's a very complicated topic, and I would actually love for people who are for Bittensor OGs to talk about this more. In my opinion, it's very difficult to find different point of views on this topic. Interesting to see how this goes. What we do know is that outside of the Bittensor ecosystem, there are tokens, I believe, like VVV, and I do believe Hype as well, that do a lot of buybacks, and I also think Near, and we have recently seen their price going up quite dramatically. So this might be a predictor for what's going to happen within the Bittensor ecosystem in the future. So, well, let's see. So thanks for tuning in. And I know for newcomers, this is pretty overwhelming, all this technical talk. But I hope that some of my followers are people like me who are really intrigued by Bittensor and who are actually thinking about all of this stuff. And I invite you to reach out to me if you want to talk more, brainstorm about these kinds of things, because I find it very interesting. So yeah, if you want more information, you can always check my website, discoverbittensor.com. And I wish you a great day.